Hey everyone, welcome to a Covalence demo on beginner CSS. Now, this is going to be extremely basic, just going over some super simple principles of CSS using a single style sheet on a single index.html file. So please take it for what it is. If you're too advanced for it, I'm sorry, but hey, you never know, you may learn a thing or two. And please, if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to click the subscribe button below to see future releases and future content, and don't hesitate to let us know if there's any additional comment that you'd like to see us put out. All right, let's get started. All right, so let's go ahead and just create a little index.html, and we're gonna stub out just a basic HTML file here. Visual Studio Code makes it super easy when you're in an HTML file. If you literally just type exclamation point and hit the IntelliSense button, it will stub out your entire index.html. Let's just give it a CSS title real quick. And we're gonna go ahead and add a link, and again, that's all using just VS Code's IntelliSense and autocomplete. And let's create a styles.css file. So we're gonna actually have to make that file real quick, styles.css, and let's just give a style or a class called box, and we're gonna leave it empty for right now. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a div called box, or a div with a class box, right? And let's go ahead and make a couple of these, right? So let's do 3 total. All right, so now we have 3 boxes. Now if we go ahead and we load this page real quick, all right, we can actually look in here, and we want to make sure that we actually have something in this body. All right, so we have 3 boxes, but by default these divs are going to have no height, right? There's nothing in them. We're not actually setting a height on these boxes, and so they don't exist. So even if we were to say red, green, and blue, and we went into our styles and we said .red, background color red, green, background color green, and finally blue, background color blue, and we were to come back here and reload the page, we will see that we have these styles here, but again, you don't see anything on the page, just an empty blank screen. We have 3 divs, we have red, green, blue, but we don't actually have anything showing, right? That's because by default divs have no width, no height. Actually, they do have a width. You can actually see that it is 1302 pixels wide, and divs automatically have display block, and so they will take up the full width of the screen, but without a height they have no real geometry, right? Think of something, 0 height is gonna not show, right? It doesn't exist yet. So if we were to say height 10 pixels and then we were to reload this page, we will see our RGB here, our red, green, blue boxes. They take up the full width of the page. And there is kind of like this outline here, and what that is the body by default has like a padding or a margin. It's actually a margin of 8 pixels on the body, right? So if we wanted to get rid of that, we would actually have to remove that in our CSS. So we can say body margin 0. Then if we reload this page, we can see that it now has no margin at all. We have no margin bleed whatsoever. And so now everything is butted right up against, right? Again, divs by default have a display of block, and so they will have a width that goes across the full screen. Items with a position of static and a display of block will take up the whole screen. If you change it to position absolute, that will no longer take place, right? So if we actually were to change this to position absolute and reload this page, we can see that they now disappear, because once again the height is 10 pixels still, but the width is 0, right? So again, that's something to always note, that position absolute elements do not have a width of 100%. They actually have a width of just their content. And so if we said box 1, box 2, and box 3, and we're going to reload this page, we now have all of our elements positioned over top of one another, right? But again, the height is only 10 pixels and the content itself is bigger than that, right? And so what we probably want to do is let's remove the height here, and we'll see that now it actually takes up, it's expanded to be the actual height of the content itself, right? And everything's positioned right on top of one another, so all you see is blue because it's the last element in the DOM tree, right? So if we were to move these around a little bit, if we were to say red, left, 20 ems, green, left, 30 ems. All right, now we see our boxes separated out. The red's 20 ems to the right. The green box is 30 ems to the right. And that left is just saying how far from the left edge it's being pushed, right? So here we go, box 3, box 2, box 1, or box 1, box 2, in the order that we put them. And this by default is going to have a left 0, top 0. And that's position absolute, right? And so by default, all elements will have a position of static. And so if we change that back or we just remove it, this is the same as just not having it at all. We can see that it goes back to how it was. The left no longer applies now. And so these basically become useless. They're not actually doing anything. And we can go ahead and just remove this as well. And again, nothing should have changed. Yep, it's identical. And it still takes up, the height is still, it's recognized, right? But the width is now back to being 100% width. All right, so we've gone through a little bit of how classes apply. We've gone through a little bit of how display works. If we wanted to say that the green was display none, right? That'll actually delete that box now. And you may be wondering, well, why the heck would you ever do that? It's really good for things like media queries, or just via JavaScript. We can change that. We can show and hide elements via JavaScript. But for instance, if we were to say at media screen and min width, let's just say 800 px, right? We're going to say that dot green is now display block, right? So now at 800 pixels, it should show. But if we look at our little, we can see it's going down 1100, 1000, 900, and then under 800, the green disappears. So using media queries, display none is super powerful and can definitely be used to show and hide elements and make your mobile experience versus your desktop experience just better overall. All right, so now that we've gone through a few media queries, let's also take a look at how we can use this knowledge to go ahead and further make some things better here. Let's go through some margin, some padding. So let's just say we want everything in the box to have a padding of 1em all the way around. All right, so now we'll take a look and we'll see that we actually have some space in here. So the content itself, if we now look at this box, we can see the content area versus the padding area, right? So the padding area is a slightly different shade. We can kind of see the space allocated for content, and then we have a 1em padding on the top, right, bottom, and left, right? All right, and now what we can do is we can show how padding and margin differ, right? And so if we say we want a padding of 1em, but we want a margin of, let's see, 0.5 ems, right? And that'll be all the way around as well. All right, now we can see that there's margin. The margin will actually push on the sides, and it actually pushes on top too, right? So we have a margin of 0.5 ems all the way around, giving some separation to the boxes, and we can see that's outside the actual element itself, right? So something interesting to note here is margin collapse, right? So if we look at the HTML here, the HTML takes up this whole area that the elements are in, but the body itself is being pushed down, and that's due to margin collapse, right? And so basically what's happening is the margin on top is being bled into the rest of the screen, and so the whole body is being pushed down. And so one way you can solve this that's done a lot is a lot of people may put a slight padding on the body. This isn't necessary. You don't have to do this. You could either remove the margin top on that top box, or you could put a slight padding all the way around. Either way, it kind of is up to you. I mean, you could even do something as small as 0.1 ems or even 1 pixel if you really wanted to. Just do 1 pixel. All right, and now if we look now at the body itself, the body does take up everything and even has that 1 pixel padding all the way around, but it keeps your margins from collapsing. So adding some padding will keep your margins from collapsing. And another example of margin collapse here is that both of these boxes have a margin of 0.5 ems all the way around, but this top one has a margin bottom of 0.5 and this bottom one has a top margin of 0.5, yet the distance between the two is still just 0.5. It's not the additive effect, so it's not 0.5 plus 0.5, so it's not a 1 differential. It's actually just 0.5. So what happens is your margins collapse to keep things separated more equally and to look better overall. And so padding does not collapse. So if we were to try and add some wrapper around this that did the spacing differently, padding would not collapse in on itself. So let's just kind of show that real quick. So if we were to say div.wrapper, right, and then let's just say we did 3 of these wrappers, right, and then we put the boxes inside each wrapper. All right, and now instead of doing a margin of 0.5 on the box, we're going to say .wrapper has a padding of 0.5 ems. All right, and so the wrapper doesn't have a color, and so it should just be transparent. All right, but now you can actually see that this top area is 0.5, but now we have an additive effect, right? So now we actually have 1 em of separation between box 1 and box 2 and box 2 and box 3. And so if we actually take a look at that, we can see how it does not collapse like the margins collapse. So depending on what your desired effect is, you can actually achieve different looks, different feels using a combination of margin and padding, and the margin collapse is actually a good thing. So a lot of the times you want that, especially when you have paragraphs, headers, paragraphs, things like that, where you have long lists of text, blogs, like all of that margin collapse is nice because it keeps things looking good, and you're still able to have margin where you want it to, regardless of whether it's text on text or an image separating the text or things like that. So margin collapse is a good thing. It can be a little frustrating sometimes, but overall it's very nice. Now let's go through, I showed you display none. There's also something called visibility, right? And visibility, the difference here is, let's go ahead and say that we don't want this display none anymore. So this, isn't really necessary. We'll leave it there for now. But instead of display none, we want to say visibility hidden. All right. And now what's going to happen is when we load this page, box 2, it's gone, but it's still taking up space, right? So it's hidden from view, but the document still acknowledges its presence, as opposed to display none, where it's completely pulled out of the DOM tree. And so we can actually see that it still exists and it's still there, but it's just hidden from view. And so that's a pretty big differentiator. Like, you want to use display none and visibility hidden separately, depending on how you actually want it to do. Like, if you still want to take up space, visibility hidden is a very, very useful technique, as opposed to just removing it from the DOM altogether. And so that would be the difference between those two. Let's go ahead, remove that for now. And now let's get into how you can actually use something like, well, let's go through border. We went through padding, we went through margin. Now let's give it a border as well. So let's say border, we want to say 2px solid black, right? So we want to give all of these boxes a 2 pixel border. All right, so now we can actually see that we have our content, we have our padding, and we have our border. So the height of these things keep increasing, right? If we wanted it to be a set height, if we wanted it to be, like, if we wanted all these boxes to be, let's just say height 3 ems, right? All right, now we can see that the content itself expands, and we have our padding and we have our border still, right? And so instead of ems, I love using ems. It's harder to actually see what's going on when you're using ems. We were using a padding of 1 em, but let's just say height 50 pixels for now. All right, just so we can actually tell, because the browser itself converts everything. All right, so now we have the 50 pixels, and we can see that our actual box is 1334 by 86. And you're thinking, well, didn't you just say height 50 pixels? Yes, we did, but the height 50 pixels is actually the height of this content here. And so the padding plus the border is now making it 86 pixels. And so the issue with that is you can get kind of confused, right? Especially if you're switching between ems, rems, pixels, viewport width units, viewport heights, viewport widths, all of a sudden it can get really difficult to try and figure out like what's happening here. Like how high are your elements going to actually be? And so the best way, in my opinion, to kind of handle this is to know how box sizing works, right? And so box sizing is a cool little thing where we can now say for all these boxes, we have this padding, we have this border, we have this height, but by default, your box sizing is actually content box, meaning that your height is the height of the content itself, right? Now, if we were to say border box, it now includes the padding and the border in your height. So if we now were to shrink this, all of a sudden everything shrinks down to be 50 pixels tall. And your content now is actually almost too small for the content inside, right? And so if we wanted to make that look a little better, we might say, all right, 55 pixels. Now, overall, things look a little bit better because the content itself is being contained within its own little content box, right? So excuse my nomenclature. I know sometimes it can get confusing between whether or not I'm talking about just the content box on the DOM itself or content box in CSS. In this case, I mean the content box contained in the DOM itself, the content box that's wrapping the content in here. You can see it by its kind of a faint purple color right now. All right, so again, that's how you would actually know, okay, now my element is definitely 55 pixels tall, and that includes the content, the padding on the top and the bottom, and the border itself, right? And that's mixing ems, pixels, all of that, right? And now we know that it's going to be, 55 pixels tall. So if we were to want to put something in one of these boxes, let's just say inside this box, let's just say we add a span in here that contains our box 1 still, but then we wanted to add a div as well. And this div is going to be class equals, let's just give it a background color of, let's see, we have our red one. Let's do something Christmassy. All right, we'll have a green box inside of the red box, right? And if we actually just run this right now, we'll see what happens real quick. All right, nothing because, again, the div itself, this green box, has no height, right? Now if we said inner box, let's just say green, and then we say inner box is going to be our class. And so we come in here. We just want to create this inner box class. All right, and let's just say we give it a height of 5 pixels. All right, now we'll see that inside of here, it's actually going to present this box to us. And again, it's the width of the container, so the padding itself is making it shorter, right? Because our padding is containing the content, and this is part of our content, right? And so it actually shortens up the width of this to be now its 100% is shorter than its parent. And that's because, again, these are all statically positioned elements. If we were to relatively position this box, so position relative, it's not going to change anything on here because it still maintains its same flow as if it was displayed statically, or sorry, if its position was static. But now what we're going to be able to do with this is we're going to be able to change how the behavior of the inner elements work, right? So now if I were to absolutely position this green box in here, it's going to be absolutely positioned to the red box itself. And it's going to actually say the left side of it is going to be the absolute left side of the element. So it's not going to admire, or it's not going to respect the padding or the border anymore. So if we said the inner box now is position absolute, all right, now all of a sudden, its its width is now 0. So let's go ahead and give it a width. We're going to say width 25 pixels. All right, so now we can actually see that because we haven't given it a left or a top, it's actually positioned almost in the same place as it was when it was statically positioned, right? So if you just set position absolute, it basically lets it respect whatever coordinates it would have fallen at as if it were statically positioned, right? Except you just didn't have a width anymore. So that can be useful, but a lot of the time you don't want that. You want to actually set a left of 0 and a top of 0, let's just say. So that would basically be an inset of 0, and then we can see that it is at the absolute left and absolute top right. And so now if we said, all right, instead of left 0, let's do right 0 and top 0. Whoops, excuse me. All right, so now it's over here, and let's just say we wanted to take up the entire, the entire width of this thing. Or sorry, the entire height. So instead of height of 5 pixels, let's give it a percentage, height 100%. All right, awesome. So now we have our actual height being 100% here. It's 51 pixels. All right, this is 55 pixels, and that's actually because the border itself, it does take an effect, it does respect border. I think I might have missaid that earlier. It doesn't respect the padding, right? So the border is still on the outside of the element, whereas the padding is on the inside. And it's relatively positioned, it's absolutely positioned relative to the inside of this element. So I'm sorry if that's confusing, but the border will always be on the outside of the element, right? And so this, like right here, would be how we would want to, if we wanted to kind of have like an image or something displayed on the right-hand side, you could do this. You could relatively position the container box, and then the child itself could be absolutely positioned and be contained over here. Now, what would be kind of cool is you can create kind of really neat effects where all of a sudden, let's say we wanted to, this inner box, we wanted to give it a border of also 2px solid white. All right. Now all of a sudden this looks kind of like garbage, right? Because we have height 100%, we have this inner border here. But the problem is that the height is 100%, but it's the content that's height is 100%. So what do we need? Border box once again. So we have our box sizing, border box. Now when we reload this, we can see how we get this little effect where this element, it almost looks like there's a transparent border around this. This isn't transparent, it's a white border. If we made a transparent border, we would still see the red behind it. And so again, that would be another effect. But a lot of people, try and create this like transparent or translucent effect with a lot of sites, and that's just not realistic, right? And so you can kind of see here that the transparent border really doesn't do much. So we can actually change this right in here just to kind of show a little bit quicker. Whereas the white border kind of creates this look and feel of, something being translucent there, right? Now we can't actually make that go through this element, right? This element still is behind it, right? This is still an element that is in the foreground of this red element, and that red box still exists behind this box. But again, it kind of gives that effect, and a lot of people can kind of create these illusions of it being a transparent border. So again, let's kind of make it a little bit wider just to show. Let's do double the width here. Oh, and again, we have that transparent border. Let's change that back to white. And actually, instead of just this, let's do 50%. All right, so now we have this 50% green. It's contained inside the border itself, but again, it kind of has this cool effect here where, we have almost like a double border around it, or it's almost like it could be going right through it, and this is kind of almost looking like, some sort of padding. And it's a neat effect. Again, it can be used for some certain UIs to make it look better, but that's just using absolute and relative positioning, knowing your borders, knowing how your padding works, and also using box sizing correctly. So again, hope this was useful information, hope it helped, and if you guys have any questions or want to see any more content on some beginner CSS, feel free to post it in the comments, and we will do our best to satisfy what you guys want and need. All right, until next time. All right, so hope you all enjoyed that. Again, it was super basic, super simple, meant for beginners trying to learn the basics of CSS, which I myself know firsthand can be an absolute nightmare to navigate. It all takes time. If you don't get it right away, do not feel bad about it. It's a lot of memorization, remembering which elements are block by default versus inline block, which we can get into in more depth later on. And also knowing that how positions relate to one another, the difference between position relative, position absolute, the default position static, and also there's other positions like position fixed and everything like that. So again, use the padding, use the margin correctly, know how to use borders, apply the styling the way that you want it to, and make all of your applications look amazing. If you have any comments or would you like to see any additional videos, feel free to throw them down there. We love feedback, positive and negative. I know we're not perfect, but we love putting out content for you guys, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. All right, everyone, till next time.